My name is Sebastian Fowler, and I'm the chair of the Board of Governors of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, also known as ALBA. ALBA, founded in 1979, is an educational nonprofit dedicated to social activism and the defense of human rights, inspired by the American volunteers of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade who fought fascism in the Spanish Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 1939. ALBA's first focus when it was founded was to establish an archive to record the experiences of these volunteers, first at Brandeis University and for the past 23 years at New York University, where the ALBA collection is housed at Tamiment Library. Currently, the archive holds the papers and effects of hundreds of volunteers, including thousands of photographs, letters, pamphlets, oral histories, personal objects, posters, and more. Drawing on these collections and working to expand them, ALBA is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade as an inspiration for present and future generations. For example, we regularly offer workshops for high school teachers to help them develop lesson plans based on these primary sources from our archive. In fact, our next workshop will be offered online on Election Day in November. Chief among our other activities are film screenings and roundtable discussions for teachers, students, and the general public, an annual gala, a quarterly magazine, The Volunteer, an annual essay prize for high school and college and graduate students, and an annual award for human rights activism granted in collaboration with the Puffin Foundation. Here is a brief video to give you a sense of our work.
Inspired by the anti-fascist activism of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives is an educational nonprofit dedicated to promoting social activism and the defense of human rights. Drawing on ALBA's collections at New York University's Tamiment Library, ALBA preserves the legacy of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade as an inspiration for present and future generations. For the past 10 years, ALBA has been conducting professional development workshops for high school educators all over the country. To date, we have reached over 1,200 teachers in more than 9 states. Many students of ALBA's Teaching Institute alumni participate in our annual essay contest honoring Lincoln veteran George Watt. Originally inaugurated in 2008 by then-Mayor Gavin Newsom and several of the surviving San Francisco Bay Area veterans, the Embarcadero is home to a national monument to the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. With a book by ALBA board member Peter Glazer and music by Eric Peltaniemi, Heart of Spain is a musical that tells the story of the diverse group of Americans who fought against fascism during the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939. ALBA presents a variety of public programs, including our Sussman Lecture Series featuring leading experts in history and human rights activism, and documentary film screenings. Each year in spring, ALBA gathers in New York City to honor the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and present the ALBA Puffin Award for Human Rights Activism. The annual celebration is co-sponsored by the Puffin Foundation, and past recipients include Proactiva Open Arms, the Association for the Recovery of Historical Memory, Brian Stevenson, and Judge Baltasar Garzon. Since our inception in 1978, ALBA has been working with progressive communities around the world. We strive for social and economic justice by increasing the awareness of progressive traditions among high school and college students, scholars, and the public at large. We invite you to join us as we honor the Abraham Lincoln Brigade by continuing their struggle for justice and freedom.
We really appreciate the chance to participate through this video in this amazing symposium on Jewish responses to fascism from the interwar period to the present day. Many thanks to Gabriel Rosenfeld and Gemma Birnbaum for allowing us to join. As you know, the Spanish Civil War broke out when Spain's progressive, democratically elected Republican government faced a military coup launched with the help of Hitler and Mussolini. While most major democratic powers opted for non-intervention, some 35,000 volunteers from around the world joined the international brigades to help defend the Spanish Republic, an effort organized by the Communist International. If the Spanish War looms large in the history of Jewish anti-fascism, it's because a large portion, at least 1/5 of those international volunteers, were Jewish. This proportion was even larger, close to 1/3, for the almost 3,000 volunteers who left for Spain from the United States to be soldiers, drivers, or medical personnel. As researchers like Gerben Zaagsma have pointed out, the Spanish chapter is often presented as the first act of Jewish resistance against fascism, fascist anti-Semitism, and ultimately against the Nazi extermination policy that culminated in the Holocaust. Against the background of post-Holocaust debates about wartime Jewish responses and behavior, much of the literature inscribes the participation of Jewish volunteers in the brigades in a larger resistance narrative, whose main purpose is to counter the myth of Jewish passivity in the face of the Nazi onslaught. To nuance this story, Zaagsma and others point out that for many of the Jewish volunteers in Spain, their primary drive to stand up to fascism was less their ethnic identity than their ideological commitment. We cannot speak, Zaagsma writes, of a specific category of Jewish volunteers within the international brigades motivated by distinct Jewish concerns and animated by a clear Jewish consciousness. Still, because Spain did become a battleground to achieve inclusion and emancipation, the experiences of the Jewish volunteers make up an important chapter in the ongoing project of Jewish modernity as it unfolded from the late 18th century onwards. The Jewish memory of the Spanish Civil War still looms large around the world, including here in the US. To illustrate this, I'd like to share some segments from one of our events a couple of years ago, featuring Joseph Budwin, who in the 1990s interviewed 39 Jewish American veterans of the Lincoln Brigade. Some of their testimonies are available online at the University of Washington's Straum Center for Jewish Studies, and they were also translated and gathered in a book that was recently published in Spain. Our event 2 years ago was presented in collaboration with the Sousa Mendes Foundation, featuring Joe Budwin, along with ALBA board members Nancy Wallach and Gina Herman.
First person whom I spoke to, and one of the men who generated the project to begin with out of ALBA, was a man named George Watt, who described to me an experience that he had only recently at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, where he listened to the guide, understandably emphasizing Jewish resistance in Vilna and in Warsaw as the primary, indeed, first Jewish resistance to fascism. And at that moment, George said, in effect, where were we? Unmentioned. Nowhere was it mentioned that there were also Jews, he told me, who fought Hitler long before in Spain. Now, whether we fought over out of our Jewishness, that's another question. Well, it's a question that I asked person after person, whether or not. It could be said that they fought in Spain, and not all of them fought. Many of them went as medical workers, and they emphasized that when we spoke. I didn't go to fight. I went to save lives, said the nurses. So my two questions really were how to account first for the fact that fully 1/3 of the Americans who went to Spain were Jewish, and across the board in the international brigades from all countries, it would be at about 20% Jewish participation. How to account for that, and also how to account for the relative silence on the subject at the time and thereafter, until people like George Watt and Bill Sussman, whom you'll hear from right now, began to talk it up and look for explanation and understanding in 1992, which, remember, my first conversations were dated about 3 months after the fall of the Soviet Union. So people were in a mood to assess their lives. I right now at retirement, I'm about the age of the people whom I interviewed 30 years ago. I know a little bit about retrospection, and that's what we did. The question that I might raise with each of them was immediately dismissed. Nobody whom I spoke to said Hitler was a complete reprobate. He hated Jews, and I went to Spain to fight for my Jewish brothers and sisters. Nobody said that. In fact, they dismissed that as a question. They preferred the language that they used then and maintained. I went to Spain as an anti-fascist. I went to Spain as an internationalist, not as a narrow nationalist, where they might regard a Jew fighting for Jews as a kind of a narrow definition. They preferred the broad internationalist position. And yet, when I talked to them over and over again, the stories turned back, began with childhood, with parents, with early education. And as Bill Sussman said, I was born to go to Spain. So you might ask, what does that mean, to be born to go to Spain? It doesn't mean anything genetic. I'm quite sure it doesn't. But here we see him as a child of 6, 7 years old with his parents and brother in Bridgeport, Connecticut, sitting on the lap of Morris Winchevsky, the famous Zayde, the grandfather of Yiddish-speaking Bundist socialism in Europe, in England, and at this point in America. Now to my old friend, Nancy Wallach.
Thank you. I'm glad to be able to share my own oral history about my father, Hy Wallach, who was a veteran of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. As the information recorded at the time his family immigrated to America indicates, it said, Chaim David Wallach, at the age of 6, whose last residence was the Polish town of Tokochin, departed from Copenhagen on the ship Helig Olav and arrived in New York on December 6, 1920. And the town he arrived from was on the border between Poland and Russia, and it was overrun by troops during World War I. But fortunately, as my father remembered it, both sides liked indulging in my grandmother's latkes. My father's grandfather, Shmuel, was the grand rabbi in their shtetl, as my father was a Koyan, a Cohen, a descendant of Aaron, the hereditary high priest. Our next door neighbor in Brooklyn, my father's uncle, was a cantor. So my father came from an Orthodox Jewish Yiddish-speaking family. And as Alva Bessie wrote in his firsthand account of the Lincolns' men in battle, my father was using his Yiddish to speak to the volunteers from many different nationalities whom he met up with on the train to Paris, where they would then cross the Pyrenees to Spain. And the German that he learned in high school was also easy to acquire due to his Yiddish background. And he would use that language as well to communicate with the Yiddish-speaking brigadistas he met in Spain, the non-Yiddish speaking brigadistas he met in Spain, such as the Yugoslav partisan Radivoj Nikolic. You can see some of the Jewish traditions he came out of at these photos from my parents' wedding, where klezmer musicians played the music they danced the Horah to, and my parents received a blessing, the Baruch, or from the rabbi. Although the wedding incorporated another tradition, as they had crossed canes in a military ceremony because my father had fought in Spain. And like many immigrant children whose first language was not English, my father took to spelling as a youngster with a great zeal, and then later in life to public speaking. And he was a great admirer of Hemingway's modern, terse literary style, long before he knew of the author's sympathy for the Spanish Republic.
That was it for now for me. Thank you so much for your attention. You can find the entire event featuring Joe Budwin on ALBA's YouTube channel. If you'd like to know more about our organization or considering supporting ALBA's work, you can visit our website, which is alba-valb.org, and our quarterly magazine can be read in its online edition at albavolunteer.org. Good luck with the rest of the symposium. Bye.